She wasn't calling for help. She was warning the others that I was coming. And from the tree lean, I could see them, standing perfectly still. They weren't wolves, and they weren't human. Nightbound Bloodline presents 5 Scary Things, based on a true story. The world is older than our maps, darker than our streetlights. And sometimes, the true stories that bleed into our reality are more terrifying than any fiction we could dare to invent. What you are about to hear are first-person accounts, shared with us under conditions of anonymity. The details have been verified where possible, the locations obscured to protect those involved. But the core of each story, the fear, the violation of natural law, remains untouched. These are not campfire tales. These are testimonies. Story 1. The Thing in the Mirrored Glass. Our first account comes from a man we'll call Daniel, a structural engineer from Ohio, a man who deals in concrete, steel, and immutable physics. My name is Daniel. I'm 42. I've been a structural engineer for 15 years. My job is to make sure things don't fall down. I deal in load-bearing weights, stress tolerances, facts. I don't believe in ghost stories. Never have. If I can't measure it, it doesn't factor into my equations. That's why what happened in the Kaufman house, it broke something in me. It broke my understanding of what's possible. It was the fall of 2018. A client had contracted us to assess an old property they purchased, a sprawling, mid-century modern place built in the 60s, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows. It was glass and shadow, beautiful in a cold way. The family had moved in, but they wanted out. They wouldn't say why, just that they felt unease. They were breaking their lease. My firm was sent to ensure the structure itself wasn't the issue, that there were no hidden faults. I arrived at dusk. The key was under a pot. The house was empty, the furniture all draped in white sheets. The last of the sunset was bleeding orange and purple through those massive west-facing windows, casting long, distorted shadows from the covered shapes. It was silent, the kind of silence that feels thick, like it's absorbing sound. I remember my footsteps on the polished concrete floor echoed too much, and then not enough, as if the house was tuning them out. My inspection was routine. Basement foundation, solid. Support beams, flawless. The architecture was actually over-engineered for its time. As I moved to the main living area, a 2-story wall of glass overlooking a dense, overgrown ravine, I felt it. That prickling on the back of my neck. The feeling you're not alone. I chalked it up to the strangeness of an empty house. Then I saw it in the glass. Not through it, into the woods. In it, in the reflection of the dark, empty room behind me. A shape was standing beside a sheet-covered armchair. A tall, thin silhouette, darker than the other shadows. Man-shaped, but elongated. Its head was cocked at an angle that looked broken. I froze. My own reflection was clear, my face pale in the dying light. This other thing was just a shade, a humanoid smudge of deeper night. I didn't breathe. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a draped statue they'd left behind. Slowly, I turned around. The space beside the armchair was empty, just bare floor. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. A nervous laugh caught in my throat. Trick of the light. Had to be. I turned back to the window to gather my things. And it was closer. In the mirrored surface of the glass, the dark silhouette was now standing directly behind my reflection. I could make out more detail. The suggestion of a shoulders that sloped too sharply, the impossible length of its arms, fingers that brushed the floor. My own eyes, wide with dawning horror, met the place where its eyes should be. There were no eyes. Just 2 deeper pits of black. It didn't move. It just stood there, a part of the reflection that shouldn't exist. A cold, chemical fear flooded my system. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a problem, an anomaly in the reality of the room. I am an engineer. I solve problems. My voice, when I found it, was a dry rasp. This isn't possible. And in the glass, the thing's head tilted to the other side. A slow, deliberate, grotesque motion, and it leaned forward, as if to rest its chin on the shoulder of my reflection. I felt it, a freezing, pinpoint cold on my left shoulder, seeping through my jacket and shirt, right into the muscle and bone. That's when I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't turn around. I sprinted for the front door, my bag forgotten. I fumbled with the lock, the cold on my shoulders spreading like a stain. I burst out into the cool evening air and didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked. I sat there, shaking, for 20 minutes. The cold spot on my shoulder took hours to fade. I never went back. I told my boss the house gave me a bad feeling, that the family was right to leave. He laughed, but he reassigned the job. I filed my report based on the first half of my inspection. The structure was sound. I left the rest out. But sometimes, in the dark glass of a window at night, I catch my reflection and I watch it. I wait to see if something else is learning to stand still enough to be seen. You see, I was wrong. I do believe in ghost stories now. I just call them by a different name. I call them structural flaws in the world itself. Story 2. The Gate in the Glen. Our second testimony takes us from the modern angles of glass and steel to something ancient, rooted in the earth. This comes from a woman we're calling Alara, a botanist whose life's work is understanding the quiet, green language of the growing world. I'm Alara. I'm 38, and I've been a field botanist for a decade and a half. My world is taxonomy, soil pH, and symbiotic relationships. I document facts. I don't deal in folklore. When I was hired to catalog rare bryophytes, mosses, and liverworts in a remote, old-growth forest in the Pacific Northwest, I was ecstatic. This was a pristine environment, untouched. The locals in the nearest town had stories, of course. They called the deep valley I was heading into Whisper Glen, said it was a place where the trees remembered things. I dismissed it as charming superstition. The forest had a preserved quality because of its inaccessibility, not some mystical protection. For the first 3 days, it was paradise. The air was rich with the scent of damp earth, decaying cedar, and life. The light was a filtered green gold. My catalog was growing. Then, on the 4th day, I found the circle. It wasn't a fairy ring of mushrooms. This was different. It was a perfect ring of stones, each about the size of a loaf of bread, half sunk into the forest floor and covered in a thick, vibrant moss of a species I'd never seen. It was a phosphorescent, silver green. In the dim understory, it seemed to hold its own faint light. In the center of the circle, nothing grew. Not a blade of grass, not a fungus, just dark, bare earth. The scientist in me was fascinated. A natural mineral deposit affecting soil composition? A microbial mat? I took photos, notes, scraped a tiny sample of the moss into a sterile vial. The air within the ring felt still, not just quiet, but static, like the silence between heartbeats. The dense birdsong of the forest seemed muted here, coming from a great distance. I set up my small tripod to get a wider shot. As I peered through the viewfinder, I saw it. A distortion. At the far edge of the stone circle, the air wavered, like heat off asphalt. But it was a cool, damp day. I straightened up, looked with my own eyes. Nothing. Through the lens again, there it was. A vertical shimmer, about the shape and height of a narrow door. A deep, resonant thrum vibrated up through the soles of my boots. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, you felt it in your marrow. It was the bass note of the earth itself. And then, from that shimmering space, a smell hit me. Not the rot of the forest, but the opposite. The scent of ozone, of crushed granite, of a place utterly sterile and ancient and empty. It was the smell of something that had never known life. Fear, then, was clean and sharp. This wasn't a predator. This was a place. And it was wrong. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely collapse the tripod. As I fumbled, a shadow fell across the circle. Not from above, where the canopy was thick. It bloomed from the center of that shimmering door space. A long, thin shadow with too many joints, stretching towards my feet. I didn't look. Every cell in my body screamed not to look at the source. I ran. I left my tripod. I crashed through ferns and over logs, guided by pure panic and my GPS unit until I burst out onto the fire road where my truck was parked. I sat in the cab, covered in scrapes and mud, the vial of silver green moss glowing faintly in my cupped hand. I drove back to town and went straight to the local historical society. An old woman there, when I described the circle and the stones, went pale. She didn't call it Whisper Glen. She used an older name. She called it the Keeping Wood. And the circle, she said, wasn't a gate to let things in. It was a lid, to keep something down. I submitted my botanical report. I listed the moss as Bryum sp. unidentified luminescent properties and recommended the area for further study. I never mentioned the door. I never mentioned the shadow. But I poured bleach on the moss sample and shattered the vial. Some things, a botanist learns, are not meant to be cultivated. Some gates shouldn't be acknowledged. The forest isn't just alive. Some parts of it are aware, and they're keeping watch. Story 3. The Stalker in the Static. Our third story descends from the ancient woods into the very fabric of our modern lives. This account comes from a man we'll call Marcus, a late-night radio host whose voice is a familiar companion to truckers and insomniacs, a conduit of sound waves traveling through the dark. I'm Marcus, 45 years old. My voice is my livelihood. For 12 years, I've hosted Night Drive, the midnight to 6 a.m. shift on KZLX. It's a call-in show for the lonely, the lost, the people who live in the small hours. I've heard every kind of story, conspiracies, confessions, poetry. I'm a skeptic by trade. You have to be. Then, in the winter of last year, the calls started. Not from listeners. On the studio landline, the private line that's only for station IDs or emergency contacts. It would ring at the same time every night, 3:15 a.m. Dead on. The first time I picked up, KZLX, Marcus speaking. Nothing but a low, rhythmic sound. Shook-lick, 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 like a record player needle stuck in a silent groove, but wetter. Underneath it, a faint, shallow breathing. Hello. Shook-lick, shook-lick. Then a voice, but not a human voice. It was a grotesque parody of my own, dragged through broken glass and static. Mayor Cuss, are you on the air? I hung up, put it down to a prank. A talented, sick one. It happened again the next night. 3:15, and the next. I stopped answering. The phone would ring 15 times and stop. The silence afterwards was worse. The studio, which was usually my cocoon of warm light and music, felt exposed. The large window looking into the dark, empty production booth became a black mirror. I started seeing movements in it, just shifts of shadow, but always at the edge of sight. Then the calls changed. I'd pick up to the SHHH click sound, and the thing would mimic other voices. Voices from earlier in my show. It would replay a caller's question about their marriage trouble or a song request in that same distorted, wet static tone. It was learning, cataloging. The terror peaked on the night of the winter storm. The power was flickering. I was alone in the building. 3:15 a.m. The landline rang. I stared at it, my heart a hammer. On the 7th ring, I grabbed it, ready to scream. It wasn't the static. It was perfect, dead silence. And then, a clear, whisper-closed voice spoke. It was my own voice, but from inside the studio. Not from the phone. From the empty guest chair across from me. I'm in the lobby, Marcus. I dropped the phone. The on-air light was on. I was broadcasting dead air. I fumbled for a music track, my hands slick with sweat. As the song swelled, I looked at the security monitor showing the empty, dimly lit lobby. There was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, a man-shaped blur of television static. It stood perfectly still, facing the security camera. Its head was a cascade of electronic snow. Then, in a glitch of pixels, it turned its head. Not on the monitor. On the other security screen, the one for the hallway outside the studio door. It was now there, in the hall. The SHH click sound wasn't in the phone anymore. It was coming from the studio speakers, softly, underneath the music. I didn't breathe. I did the only thing I could think of. I went live on the mic. My voice was shaking. I said, "This is Marcus on KZLX. If anyone is listening, I am not alone in the studio. Please, call the police. Give them this address." The static figure in the hallway monitor tilted its head. On the lobby screen, it was gone. The SHH click sound stopped. The phone rang one final time. I didn't answer. The police came 20 minutes later. They found nothing. No signs of entry. I took a week off. When I came back, the calls had stopped. But something stayed with me. A sense of frequency. You see, I used to think the night was empty. Now I know it's full of signals. Most are just noise. But some are listeners. And they don't just want to hear your voice. They want to learn how to use it, to speak through you. Every time I put on my headphones now, I hear that wet, static click in the silence. And I wonder what band I'm broadcasting on, and who, or what, is finally tuning in. Story 4, The Carrion Lights. Our fourth testimony ventures into the vast, empty spaces between towns, where the night sky is a sprawling canvas and the only company is the hum of your own engine. This comes from a woman we're calling Anya, a long-haul trucker who has seen every mile of asphalt this country has to offer. Name's Anya. I'm 51. I've been driving an 18-wheeler for 28 years. I've seen blizzards on the I-80, dust storms in the Mojave, and every kind of reckless four-wheeler you can imagine. I'm not spooked by empty roads. The empty ones are the safe ones. Until you meet something that's decided the road is its territory, too. This happened on State Route 77, a long, lonely stretch cutting through high desert in Nevada. Nothing out there but scrub, stars, and the occasional ghost town. It was about 2 a.m. I had the cruise set, my CB quiet except for the hiss. My headlights carved 2 tunnels through the absolute black. That's when I saw the first light. A single, bright white point, like a star, but down on the horizon, just off the shoulder of the road. Then it went out. A minute later, another one, closer this time, on my side. On. Off. It wasn't a flicker. It was deliberate. Like a blink. I sat up straighter, eased off the throttle. Probably some kids with drones, I muttered to myself. But my hands were tied on the wheel. There were no houses out here. No kids for 50 miles. A third light. This one was brighter, bluer. It didn't blink. It streaked parallel to my truck, keeping pace with me, just beyond the barbed wire fence. It moved smoother than any car, any animal. Silent. Then it shot ahead, maybe a quarter mile, and stopped, hovering right above the road. A cold, blue-white orb, casting no light on the asphalt below it. My CB crackled to life. Not with a voice, with a sound. A low, guttural chittering, like insects made of broken glass. It scratched at my ears. Underneath it, I could hear wet sounds. Gnawing. The blue light began to drift towards me. Not fast. Slowly. Deliberately. A lure. That's when my headlights caught the shapes on the road. Just ahead, where the blue light had hovered. Dark, lumpy forms. Roadkill. But too much of it. A jackrabbit, a coyote. Things I couldn't identify. All in one spot, pulled into a rough pile right on the center line. And standing over them were 2 more of those lights, smaller, darting erratically over the carcasses like feeding things. I slammed the brakes. The rig shuddered, tires screaming. I didn't stop. I downshifted, gripped the wheel, and aimed straight for the gap between the pile and the shoulder. As I roared past, the light from my cab illuminated the pile for a split second. They weren't just lights. The blue orb closing in on my driver's side had a form. A dark, spindly core, like a twisted branch, at the center of that impossible glare. And the smaller ones over the roadkill, they had legs. Too many, jointed all wrong. They were feeding on the light, or the energy, or the death. I don't know. But the chittering on the CB swelled into a frantic, hungry screech as I passed. The blue light kept pace with my window. I felt a deep, resonant thrum through the metal of my truck, a vibration that made my fillings ache. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes on the road, my foot flat on the accelerator, praying the diesel didn't stall. For 5 miles, it stayed with me. Then, as if bored, it winked out. The CB returned to empty static. I drove until sunrise, shaking so hard I had to pull over at the first truck stop I saw. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? I hosed down the front of my rig, washing off dust and God knows what else. I still drive that route. It's the fastest way, but I never stop. And if I see a light where no light should be, I don't slow down. I speed up, because out there in the dark, there are things that don't hunt for meat. They hunt for movement, for isolation, for the warmth of a running engine in a sea of nothing. They're the carrion lights, and they're always waiting for something to stall, to stop, to die, so they can come down and feed. Story 5. The Blood Moon Covenant. Our final account is the oldest, steeped in a dread that predates our cities, our roads, even our names for the creatures that haunt the dark. This comes from a man we'll call Leo, a historian who specialized in translating forgotten texts until he translated one too many. I am Leo. For most of my 44 years, I was an archivist and philologist. My world was parchment and vellum, dead languages and crumbling sigils. I believed the past was a puzzle to be solved, its monsters merely metaphors for famine or war. I was a fool. The document was part of a private collection in rural France, a fragmented grimoire from the 14th century. It was not written in Latin, but in a bizarre pidgin of Occitan and something else. The owner wanted it translated discreetly. The pages spoke of a covenant, not with demons, but with what the text called les gardiens de profondeurs, the guardians of the depths. It described a ritual to be performed under a blood moon, to renew a bargain for fertile land and protection from plague. The ritual involved a specific chant and the offering of a witness who sees but does not believe. I treated it as a curious anthropological artifact. My mistake was speaking the words aloud. I was alone in my study, piecing together a particularly convoluted passage. I recited the phonetic chant, just to hear its rhythm. The air in my study grew heavy, cold. The scent of turned earth and old stone, like a newly opened tomb, flooded the room. My desk lamp flickered, and in the corner of my eye, in the dark space between two bookshelves, I saw a shape solidify. It was tall, wrapped in what looked like tattered, dark robes that seemed to absorb the light. But within the hood, there was no face, just a suggestion of something elongated and 2 points of smoldering amber light where eyes should be. It didn't move. It simply observed. I froze, my academic detachment shattering into primitive shards of terror. This was no metaphor. The chant was a key, and I had just turned it in the lock. It was gone a second later. The smell remained. For weeks, nothing. I told myself it was stress, a waking dream. Then the dream started. Not dreams, visitations. I'd be in a vast, subterranean chamber, and they would be there, ringing me. The guardians. They were not human, not animal. They were like statues of polished basalt given a predatory sentience. They communicated without words, pouring concepts directly into my mind. Images of deep forests they claimed as temples, of ancient stones they had placed, of a covenant that demanded acknowledgement. The blood moon was approaching, and with each night, their presence in my peripheral vision grew stronger. I'd see them standing in the rain across the street, unmoving. I'd glimpse one in the mirror behind me in a crowded cafe, the only still point in the motion. They were hurting me. The document mentioned a place of old stone to complete the ritual. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, where they wanted me to go, the standing stones on the landowner's property where the grimoire was found. I was to be the witness, the offering. I fled. I burned my notes, deleted my files, and left the country. I live now in a city of millions, surrounded by light and noise. It helps, but not always. Because on certain nights, when the moon is just a sliver, I'll see a tall, dark shape standing between two buildings down the alley. Or I'll catch that scent of wet stone on the subway. They are reminding me, the covenant is real. It was never about devil worship. It was a land deal with the oldest landlords of this world. Entities that were ancient when man cowered in caves. They protect their devotees in their way, and they collect their due. I spoke the words. I broke the seal on their silence. And now, I fear that when the next blood moon rises, they will no longer be content to just watch from the shadows. They will come to collect their witness and finalize a bargain I never meant to make. 5 testimonies. 5 fractures in the reality we take for granted. From the sentient silence in a mirrored glass to the ancient things waiting at a stone gate, from a voice in the static to hunters of light in the desert, to a covenant written in blood and shadow. Different phenomena, perhaps, but they share a common, chilling thread: the confrontation with an intelligence that is profoundly other. An intelligence that operates on rules we cannot fathom, with motives that are utterly alien to our own. These are not mindless monsters. They are entities, presences, forces with purpose. And the most terrifying part of each story is not the moment of confrontation, but the aftermath, the lifelong knowledge that the world is not as safe, as known, or as ours as we believed. This is why we listen. This is why these stories must be told. Not to provoke fear for its own sake, but to acknowledge the shadows that stretch just beyond the edge of our understanding. To remind us that the map is not the territory, and that some territories are older and darker than any cartographer could ever chart. If you have faced a similar fracture in your own reality, if you have a story that haunts the edges of your own nights, we invite you to share it below. Your testimony adds to the tapestry of the unknown. Thank you for journeying into the darkness with us. If you found yourself gripped by these accounts, please show your support. Like this video, subscribe to Nightbound Bloodline, and ring the bell so you never miss when we cross the next threshold. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.